going to walk you through parts of my master's dissertation for my MSc in Finance and Investment Management at the University of Aberdeen. The title of the dissertation is Financing Biomedical Research with Healthcare Derivatives as a Potential Means to Reduce Therapy Prices. Looking back, this is quite a confident title, and it represents more the intention of the work rather than what I was able to demonstrate. But I think that's just what happens when you maybe get a bit over-enthusiastic about your research. Let me introduce you to the basic idea of healthcare derivatives. I came across this idea in a random article I found online. And to be honest, I'm not sure the way it developed in my head is what the original author had in mind, but to me that doesn't really matter, because what matters here is that she stimulated thoughts in my mind, right? The options are essentially a form of pre-sale tool or insurance, which promises access to a drug that's still in the research and development stage at the time of the options issue. And thus the investors share the development risk with the company. In return for this risk sharing, they will gain access to the future cure, should it materialize, at a much cheaper rate. And this cheaper price is locked in by futures contracts, which can be acquired later. The benefit for the issuing company is that it's essentially cheap finance, because the payment for the options is not repayable to the investors. My understanding is that the words call options and futures contract used here are more to be seen as loan words from the financial industry, but they don't actually function in the very same way as they would, for example, in commodities trading. The literature review also contains a part on financial innovation in healthcare. And I pick out, for example, social impact bonds and organ futures, about which I've blogged as well on Bluestains. The whole point of that chapter was really to place the healthcare derivatives in the context of other financial innovation, even though there's no direct link between these different financial tools. But I wanted to show that it's not that crazy an idea to try and use concepts from the finance industry in the healthcare sector that are more radical than what's around just now. And I'm not too sure I'm getting that point across very well in that introductory part. Essentially, what I did in this dissertation was to come up with a framework for healthcare derivatives. So literally, I made it up without specific references. The reason I thought I can do this is because I read papers on organ futures, and the authors just did the same. They just came up with rules of how they thought organ futures should work, and then embedded this in whatever their area of expertise was, usually more law-focused. The original author discussed healthcare derivatives more in the context of mass diseases, for example, Alzheimer's. But I had come across this rare disease drug called Zolgensma, which was at the time, and I think currently still is, the most expensive drug in the world, because it costs over $2 million per treatment course per person. And these kind of genetic interventions like Zolgensma are up and coming, so the healthcare industry and the health insurers must find ways to finance these. And that's why it was so interesting to play with this novel idea of healthcare derivatives on the background of rare diseases as opposed to very common mass diseases. Looking back now, I see even more limitations of my study than I did when I was in the midst of it. And I thought I'd point out some of them. I find this is quite a naive piece of work, which is not surprising because I only had about 2.5 months on something completely new. So I can forgive myself that there's really a lot of naivety around drug pricing and how it relates to R&D costs. And on that note, I must say I don't find academic literature too helpful, which is obviously the kind of literature I've focused on for this academic piece of work. But after the dissertation, I kept looking into the topic and kept reading more publicly available articles from blogs or magazines and so on. And they are actually much more insightful and realistic than the academic publications I've found. I think a study like this would probably benefit a lot from including more non-academic literature from industry experts or VCs, other investors who have deeper insights. But it doesn't feel like these are allowable resources when you're a student. at least not to a high percentage, as part of your literature review. Another big limitation, and I knew this at the time already, of course, was the massive oversimplification. Because I'm not a modeler and I didn't aim to create any forecasting mathematical models. I'm not trained in that, so I really didn't feel that was appropriate to try here in this short space of time. So I simply made up scenarios based on certain anchor points to develop an investment timeline. But also there were huge simplifications around how the industry works, how drug approval works. I could imagine that an expert might cringe seeing that, but I just needed something to start off with, really, as an outsider to it all. Even though my simplistic scenarios couldn't really demonstrate that healthcare derivatives are, the shining beacon of future healthcare financing, I feel there's potential here and that more work should be done by more experienced people or, people who have more time to invest in these things, because I think they fit in the wider framework of healthcare financing tools. Traditional ones like angel investment, venture capitalists, grants and all that sort of stuff, but also other innovations like biobonds or social impact bonds.